Hello everyone, and welcome once again to the Temple Institute Parsha class. My name is Gedalia Meyer, and I'm podcasting from Ma'ale Adumim in Israel. Among the great questions of human knowledge is the question of God. This question takes many forms. Probably the most recent iteration of this question is whether or not God exists. This, to some degree, has become the defining feature of the last 100 years or so. A sizable portion of the world has rejected all notions of a deity and is perfectly satisfied with a world with no God. A probably equally sizable portion still sticks with the old notion that there must be a deity, for without one, the world and everything in it could not possibly be. Along with this go common ideas of morality and spirituality, and all kinds of variations of these that fit into the general package of religious belief. Prior to recent centuries, the big religious question was not whether God exists, but what God was. Many wars were fought over this question, in addition to almost countless disputes over the true nature of God. These disputes comprise almost all of recorded human history. From pagan times through the long centuries of monotheistic dominance up until the advent of science, this was the burning issue in the minds of most people. It was not just important to get it right, it was everything. If one was on the wrong side of religious questions in any given time and place, it could be death or banishment or life as a despised outsider. It is a fascinating observation that so much of life could be determined by a belief that had virtually no empirical path of resolution. Judaism was no stranger to these debates. Judaism itself, despite making a strong case for consistency and constancy in its most basic notions about God, has gone through several of its own twists and turns in its collective understanding about God. From the various images of God in the Bible, to the early rabbinic ideas, to the philosophical and mystical explorations of the Middle Ages, to the more modern notions, which are a mixture of all of these, Judaism has managed to make this question its central theme, even if the question rarely gets formally addressed. It is almost as if Judaism wants to keep the question alive and burning in private, while publicly claiming that there is nothing here to discuss. The oldest images of God, of course, come from the Bible. From the Creator at the beginning of Genesis, to the various names of the deity to whom the patriarchs spoke, to the Redeemer God of the Exodus, to the sometimes wrathful and sometimes merciful God of much of the rest, we have plenty of images to choose from. If anything, there are too many. God can be a man of war, or a shepherd, or a king sitting on a throne, or even indescribable by any human terms. The only truly definitive thing that can be said about the biblical notion of God is that it is always there. Atheism was not much of an option in biblical times, but there is one more fairly definitive idea of God that emerges from the Bible, that however God is described, there can only be one. This week's Parsha is called Va'et Hanan. It is a bit of a clumsy word that does not translate easily. It essentially means, and I pleaded, the beginning of a sentence in which Moshe describes how he begged God to allow him to enter the Holy Land to see for himself the fulfillment of the promise made to his ancestors. His requests were denied by God, and he was not allowed to enter the land that he had done so much to guide his people towards. It was a bitter fate that seems a bit puzzling in light of all that had happened up to then in the story. It is not easy to understand why Moshe, of all people, was not granted this privilege. It almost seems as though he belonged to the era of the Exodus and had to leave the next stage of Israelite history to those who followed. This parsha reads like a general overview of biblical Judaism. It contains its share of fire and brimstone threats for veering from the commandments, and an equal share of promises of a land flowing with milk and honey if the commandments are faithfully observed. It goes into the destiny of the Israelites and the great act of history that they took part in. It lists the challenges they have faced and will face in the future. It even contains a recap of the giving of the Ten Commandments. But after all of that, there is a short paragraph that is easily overlooked if one doesn't know what to look for. It contains the central core of Jewish belief. This paragraph is known as the Shema. It is comprised of a total of 6 verses, none of which are particularly long or complex. They are all easy to understand and don't appear to contain any hidden mystical ideas that only the initiated understand. It speaks of love of God with all of one's heart, soul, and power. It stresses remembering these words, speaking of them at all times, even binding them upon one's hand and between the eyes. It closes with writing them down and affixing them to the doorpost of one's house. The introduction of this little paragraph is probably the best known sentence in all of Judaism. Jews who otherwise may not know the first thing about God and Judaism and Torah are very possibly quite familiar with this line, even in the original Hebrew. This line is traditionally known as Shema, since that is the first word of the verse. The entire paragraph is also now known as the Shema, since it all comes as one collective set of ideas. But there is no question that the real core of the Shema is this opening verse. It doesn't merely speak volumes. It lays out the core of monotheistic belief. Hear, Israel, Hashem is your God. Hashem is one. That is the standard Jewish translation of this famous expression. There are several other translations that have waxed and waned through the years, but this one probably is the most accurate. The word here is the translation of the iconic word Shema. Israel is Israel. Hashem is the Jewish way of saying the unpronounceable biblical name for God. The word itself means the name. The actual word for God in the verse is Eloheinu, which is probably best translated as our God. Then the same unpronounceable name comes up again, followed by the word echad, which means one. That's it. It's all contained in 6 simple words. It really couldn't be more straightforward. It is telling the Israelites that they have to understand that their deity is what is described by this very biblical name, and that this deity is one. The first 2 words really say nothing at all other than getting the attention of the target audience. The next 2 words identify whatever was understood by that name as being nothing other than their God. The last 2 words are about as easy translatable a phrase as exists in the Bible. But finding out what they actually mean is really the essence of Judaism, and perhaps by extension, the entire belief of monotheism. God is one. Probably the original intent of this simple idea was to dispel the commonly held pagan notion that there were more than one deity. The pagan world, of course, had no restrictions on the number of gods that can inhabit their pantheons. They could have as many gods as there were forces in the natural world. They could have gods of love or war or fertility or death. Their deities were not really gods as much as powers to explain the many otherwise incomprehensible facets of life and existence. The Torah, with this single 2-word phrase, was saying that all of those powers, however different and mutually incompatible they may have seemed, were really just one. This alone was a major revelation in biblical times. To claim that all these apparently distinct forces in the world were really just one core power was nothing short of revolutionary. To believe that the incomprehensible power that brings rain is the same as that which brings death would have been the biblical equivalent of believing in a flat earth. That the moral guiding force of human life was that which dictated the fate of nations was as far-reaching and as prescient as notions of freedom of belief and of choice were in relatively modern times. The oneness of God was the unifying feature of biblical and Jewish belief that brought everything from the distant heavens to the natural world to the thoughts in the mind of a person under one guiding power. It happens that Judaism, unsurprisingly, has moved on from even this far-reaching concept since biblical times. The oneness of God has found its way into the most profound areas of Jewish philosophy and mysticism. As Jewish thinkers, sometimes working in an exclusively Jewish environment and sometimes drawing from parallel ideas in Islam and Christianity and other religions, delve deeper and deeper into the hidden realms of esoteric theology, they discovered spiritual pathways of God's oneness that may have astounded even those early monotheists of biblical times who first entered these unknown regions. Jewish mystics were among the first to explore the somewhat obscure branch of theology known as panentheism. This strange word encapsulates the belief that God is both within everything and that everything is within God. In other words, the belief that God is all of existence. This is not quite the same as the more familiar term pantheism, which restricts God's reality to the world as we know it. Panentheism is the more expansive belief that finds God within all reality and yet does not limit God to the limitations of what we know as reality. This mind-opening theology allows for an unexpected pathway in the oneness of God. Not only is there only one power which accounts for all the different forces found in nature, but all of reality is really nothing more than a manifestation of God. This, in a sense, is the ultimate in oneness. Everything we see and experience and live within, even that which is abstract like thoughts and ideas, from the most material thing to the subtlest concept, is all a collage of shades made of the same divine essence. It is as though all of reality is a dream in the mind of God, and God is both the contents of the dream and the mind of the dreamer who encompasses it. As remarkable as it may seem, some of those who have allowed their minds to glimpse this unity have found a hint of it in a verse in this week's Parsha. Prior to the Shema and the retelling of the Ten Commandments, in the middle of a speech about the uniqueness of the Israelite experience, there is this verse. Quote, "You have been shown to know that Hashem is God. There is nothing else other than Him." While this verse, on its most basic level, means that there are no other deities, on a very literal level, it seems to express this very idea that there is nothing else other than God. As unbelievable as it may seem, it is possible that even deep in biblical times, this idea was floating about, almost between the words. There is God, and there is nothing else. Shabbat Shalom.